Hi, I'm Don. Today we're painting this PERTURABO model from Forge World. This is just a quick video on underpainting, and it's basically part 1 of the painting of this model. After priming with black primer, we'll turn this PERTURABO model into this. Hi, I'm Don. Welcome to my studio. This channel is supported by all these awesome brands. First, I primed it with Mecha Black Primer. I thinned it 1:1 with my thinning sauce and then painted it with my Colani airbrush, which is a 0.4 airbrush at around 25-ish PSI. I airbrushed the Mecha Black Primer around 2 thin coats and make sure you let dry in between coats. We're basically building up the underpainting of this model via dry brushing using our Redgrass glass palette. Now let's paint. Let's start with Basalt Gray. Basalt Gray has the perfect, it's the darkest gray that is just right, just perfect. It's dark enough so that you see the difference from the black primer to this basalt gray. It's a bit lighter than London gray and definitely lighter than German gray. You have the option to use neutral gray or basalt gray or London gray in this part of the painting process, but German gray and black gray are too close to black primer, thus it's a bit of a waste of time. The basalt gray here is basically our base color, and you could apply it heavier than the usual dry brushing, meaning you may choose not to unload the paints too much. You may not use a piece of towel to unload the paints. You just need to rub it on the drier areas of the glass palette so that you have a wetter brush, and just make sure you leave the really deep crevices black so that you have a bit of volume and contrast between the basalt gray and the black primer. So you may do a heavier dry brushing at this point. You may choose not to unload the paints too much, and you may apply a bit more pressure at this point of the dry brushing process. Make sure to apply this dry brushing in 2 passes before you proceed to our next color. Now, after letting this color dry, we proceed to our next color, which is dark sea gray, which is not really dark. Now we're using a smaller dry brush to limit the coverage of our dry brushing. Also, similar to basalt gray, you may notice that the dark sea gray looks light on the glass palette. The tone is very light, but similar to basalt gray, the paint dries darker. The paint turns darker as it dries. Unlike our first color, I am now unloading the brush, the excess paints on the brush on my shirt. Of course, you could use a piece of towel, but I'm used to rubbing it on my shirt, my tummy basically, and then you're applying less pressure than the basalt gray, and of course, we're using a smaller dry brush. The smaller flat brush and less paints, and of course less pressure, will ensure that we paint less or we cover less with this color so that we don't fully cover the basalt gray and of course the black primer. We are practically doing layering, although via dry brushing, because we're painting less areas as the colors get lighter. Do not worry at all if you overdo this, any of these colors, because even the gloss white that we're going to use as our highlight color, because we're going to tone this down with inks, washes, transparent paints, and maybe some oil washes too. Now we're using gloss white. I highly recommend that you get gloss white. This is like the whitest white ever, because I don't know, it just looks like it's whiter than white. Maybe because it's glossy, but I really recommend it for extreme highlights. In this case, we're using it to exaggerate the contrast between the darker black primer and the darker grays and the highlights. Of course, you could play it safe with silver gray, deck tan, ivory, or off-white, but we're choosing the whitest white, which is gloss white, because again, we're exaggerating the contrast because we will tone this down in part 2 of the painting of this model. After experimenting with so many Vallejo white paints or semi-white paints, the gloss white is the perfect paint for this job, and it creates such an enormous contrast between the darker grays and the highlights, and it will look really good once we do glazing and washes later. So we're applying the gloss white with the least pressure, and we're unloading the excess paint on the brush on my shirt. Of course, again, you could use a piece of towel, but the point is we're applying this with the least amount of paint and with the very light pressure. Similar to basalt gray and dark sea gray, apply this in 2 passes so that you get full coverage or you maximize this color in the model. Make sure to let dry in between layers or coats so that you won't rub off the previous layer. That's it, PANCIT! Now we have a very nice underpainting that will look super good once we apply the colors with inks, washes, or maybe even oil paints. Of course, if you have contrast paints, you could use that and you'll have a very nice model very soon. For very detailed models like this one, I find that dry brushing or underpainting via dry brushing looks better than just using an airbrush and painting white on top of black primer. This gives me it exaggerates the details of the model, and it will give you a very nice underpainting for the colors later. Again, less pressure, less paint, smaller brush as the colors get lighter. Make sure you subscribe so that you won't miss part 2 of the painting of this model. That's it, we're done. I hope you liked the video. Do like, comment, subscribe, and consider joining the channel so that you'll be part of our Discord community. Saludos!
Yeah.